year is 2003. The boxers are American tough guy Byron Mitchell and the pride of Wales, the undefeated Joe Calzaghe. On the night of the fight, June the 28th, 2003, Joe Calzaghe was 31 years of age. This was his 35th fight. He had 0 defeats on his record, 0 draws on his record, and he had an aura of invincibility about him. This was his 13th title defense. No one had even looked close to beating him, apart from a close decision against Robin Reid, whereby Joe Calzaghe, of course, after the fight would argue that he was having an off night, and the reality is Robin Reid wasn't even fit to lace his boots. His most prominent win of his career thus far was against Chris Eubank, where I watched that fight and Joe Calzaghe beat him fair and square. However, critics would argue that this was a watered down version of Chris Eubank, a diluted version, because he'd been in wars with the likes of Nigel Benn, Steve Collins, and tragically Michael Watson in the past, and he was battle weary when he fought Joe Calzaghe. Joe Calzaghe would describe the fight with Chris Eubank as his toughest fight, mainly because he hadn't done 12 rounds ever before, and after the knockdown in the first round of Chris Eubank, he got too excited, in his own words, went in for the kill, and he was completely spent by about round 5 or 6. And he always jokes that before the fight he spoke to Chris Eubank, and Chris Eubank said, I'm going to take you one place you've never been before. I'm going to take you to the trenches. And Joe Calzaghe said, fair play, he took me to the trenches. So the bell goes to start round 1, and it was quite eventful round 1, as in for the first 30 seconds neither man was trying to take the other man's head off. At one point Calzaghe sort of stumbled out of the ring. He hadn't been hurt or nothing, and slipped on the advertisement board. Looked like he grazed his shin a bit. He quickly gets back in the ring. They start fighting again, and the second minute of round 1, Mitchell catches Calzaghe a couple of times. However, Calzaghe catches Mitchell about a dozen times. The last minute of round 1, the audience, the commentators, people watching home, wondered if Calzaghe was actually going to try and finish him, because he was visibly hurting Mitchell, and it was only round 1. Mitchell had never been stopped before in his career. The bell goes to end round 1. Mitchell wearily walks back to his corner. Calzaghe walks back to his corner. He's immediately greeted by his dad and his trainer, Enzo Calzaghe, who kisses him on the cheek and says, good round, son. And no one would argue with that. It was a good round. Now, I don't know what was said in between rounds 1 and 2 in the corners. I would imagine Byron Mitchell's corner were telling him, you need to do this differently, you need to do that differently to stop this happening and that happening. Calzaghe's corner, I would imagine, was saying that was a very good round. Keep it up. If you see an opportunity, jump on the opportunity. You know, there was no need for no over dramatics like, think of your kids, think of your kids. It hadn't reached that stage of the fight yet. So round 2 continues in much the same vein as round 1, really. It's a bit of a scruffy affair. Calzaghe's landing some big shots once again. Byron Mitchell is struggling to deal with Calzaghe's hand speed. Then, approximately 30 seconds into round 2, the unthinkable happens. Out of nowhere, the champion gets dropped. Silence. The commentary stops dead. The crowd, the pub I was watching the fight in, complete silence. The champ was on the ring floor in like a crawling position. Joe looked genuinely hurt. Only thing is, he looked hurt for about 1 second. Then he quickly gets to his feet in double quick time. Now he doesn't look hurt. Now he looks embarrassed and very angry. Up until this point in his career, Joe Calzaghe had never tasted the canvas. He'd been maybe buzzed a few times, stunned a few times, definitely caught with shots here and there, but he'd never been on the canvas. He'd never had to get up and see the referee giving him a count 1, 2, and he'd never faced this type of adversity. We were going to find out what Joe Calzaghe was really made of. Figuring he has his man hurt, Byron Mitchell does what any fighter would do in this position. He does what his cornermen are screaming at him to do in this position. He goes in for the kill. However, as he's trying to land another finishing shot, he gets caught by a huge left hand from the champion Calzaghe, who at this point has got his back to the ropes. The shot catches Mitchell flush. Mitchell gets sent sprawling forward into the bottom ropes. Credit to him, he gets straight back up. But the mad thing is, within 15 seconds of him sending Joe Calzaghe to the canvas, now he's the one who's had to climb up off the floor, and he's the one watching the referee do this to him. 1, 2, 3. He's the one thinking, whoa, what the fuck? Joe is back on the attack, but this time with a real sense of purpose and malice. He starts cracking Mitchell with lefts, rights, uppercuts, more lefts, more rights. For a split second, he looks at the ref, Dave Parris, to say, are you going to stop this or what, mate? More lefts, more rights. Byron Mitchell, for his part, is staggering around the ring like a pissed up idiot who's had 10 Jaeger bombs, and now he's on the dance floor trying to tap on. One of the many punches Joe Calzaghe has thrown at Byron Mitchell bounces off his skull hard enough to send him reeling back towards his own corner. The ref decides now, I've seen enough. He waves the fight off. Joe Calzaghe turns and he walks towards his own fans in the crowd. He has his arms spread out in like a hugging gesture, and he appears to be shouting, yes, yes, like as if he's proved a point to some faceless doubters. A few seconds later, Mitchell in his corner seem angry about the stoppage. Obviously, they feel like it was stopped prematurely and that Mitchell was not completely out on his feet. He still had some fight left in him. And it was a, world title, for Christ's sake, as they'd say. Joe turns around and he comes back towards Mitchell's corner, toned down the celebrations a bit now, and he wants to show sportsmanlike conduct and mutual respect. Byron Mitchell has no problem with that. He hugs Joe and he affectionately pats his glove on the top of his head. No hard feelings there. I always personally remember this fight for a couple of reasons. I feel like Calzaghe answered a lot of questions that night. It'd been 6 years since he won the title from Chris Eubank, and he had a lot of doubters. He couldn't seem to land the big fights with the big names, and that wasn't really his fault. It was down to, the men in suits. And he'd been hampered with hand injuries. He struggled through his career with hand injuries badly. And, the armchair experts were always asking questions like, oh, you haven't fought a big name yet, you haven't proved yourself. What would you do if you ever got dropped? We've never seen you proper hurt and then come back. And he answered that question against a heavy-hitting Byron Mitchell, and it was a very exciting fight. And Calzaghe's a Welshman, the same as myself. I was invested in him. I felt like a lot of Welsh boxing fans, I was invested in him, and it was just brilliant to see him come through this test. Okay guys, that's the video. If you made it to the end of the video, thank you very much for watching. If you liked the video, do me a huge favor, hit like and subscribe. These videos are going to improve and get more polished and better. And feel free to comment. If you feel like I left out any important details that you remember, feel free to comment. Also, tell us where you were when you watched this fight, if you remember it. Tell us about it. Tell us your little story. I got a little story about this fight. I watched it in a pub called the Woodstock 2 days after my 24th birthday. And since then, the pub's been knocked down and replaced by houses. But I remember that night vividly. So I'll see you again on another episode of Walking, Choking, Boxing.